Hello, today we are going to be talking to you about the various ways of measuring inflation and the impacts of inflation. To start this off, I will first be distinguishing between inflation, disinflation, and deflation. As you can see by this graph, inflation is represented by the increasing rate of prices. Not only does it lie on the positive axis, but the rate at which prices are increasing is increasing itself. Disinflation is still an increase in price, as it lies on the positive quadrant. However, the rate at which prices are increasing is lowering or slowing down. Deflation is a decrease in overall prices, as it lies on the negative quadrant. Also, it can either be increasing or decreasing the rate, as long as it is negative. CPI, or Consumer Price Index, is the measurement of the average consumption of a household. This is closely related to inflation and can even be used as a base measure of inflation. This works in a similar way as to how inflation measured between years works, in that CPI, a base year is chosen, and then all future years are compared to it. If the CPI increases, it can be inferred that there was inflation, as prices were increased from the prior year. This can be seen by the red marked areas on the graph. Likewise, if it slows its increase, disinflation can be inferred, and a decrease in price can be seen as deflation.
And so now that Kevin's clarified what this wonderful new measurement of CPI is, we can now begin to bash it, as every economic measurement does indeed have its shortcomings, and CPI's many shortcomings stem from the fact that it's the average of what the average household will consume in a year. But problems then begin to arise when we consider the fact that there are low-income households and high-income households that do not have the same amount of money as this average household. So therefore, these households that earn different amounts of money will likely differ from the average household in the amount of goods or types of goods that they actually buy. Your low-income households will buy, say, Easy Mac and cheese, while your high-income household will buy lots of gourmet mac and cheese. And because these two goods have price levels that change at different rates compared to your standard mac and cheese, households with different income levels will therefore all have different income levels and different inflation rates. Another major issue with CPI's inflation figures is that this data may not even reflect consumption patterns accurately. As Kevin had said originally, in the first year where CPI is created, the government sets the amount of goods and the types of goods that are purchased. But as time goes on and the amount of goods change because of price changes and the presence of sales, such as good old Black Friday, consumers will logically buy cheaper goods. But because CPI fixes the amount of goods that it has inside of it, it will continue to incorporate the same amount of now more expensive goods that are not actually purchased as frequently, creating a misleading interpretation of consumer patterns. CPI also cannot take into account newer items that are introduced following the base year, and it cannot reflect the changing quality of goods, just how their price changes. And with so many different goods then available to be incorporated into what CPI is, governments then typically stray away from highly volatile goods, traditionally energy and food prices, say the price of oil, because these highly volatile goods will offer very misleading information about the overall or underlying rate of inflation. And so now that we've spoken a bit about what CPI is and the issues with CPI, we'll be going into another sort of inflation index, known as PPI.
PPI. PPI is a weighted index of prices at the producer level. In this case, the producer level refers to the wholesale level. Wholesale is what businesses pay for goods. What can be included in PPI? All the physical good producing industries that make up an economy. However, imports are not included. PPI is a finished goods index minus the food and energy components, which are subtracted out because how much they can change from day to day and week to week. Because they change so much, the food and energy components are considered volatile and not a good indicator of anything. PPI is an indicator of CPI. Because of this, PPI makes a good indicator of inflation. PPI changes should always be represented on the basis of percentage.
We just talked about the ways you know there is inflation. So now let's find out what type of inflation it is. There are two types, demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. They should both seem very familiar to you. Demand pull inflation is defined as the increase in price arising from the increased overall demand for a nation. As you can see in the graph, the aggregate demand is increasing, so it shifts to the left, which causes the price level and real GDP to increase. This shows inflation. Basically, anything that causes the aggregate demand to increase causes inflation. Go back into your notes to see what shifts aggregate demand in order to see what would cause inflation. Next, we have cost push inflation. This is the decrease in the SRAS curve, which causes the real GDP to decrease and the price level to increase, which causes inflation. It happens when the cost of production of a nation's firm increases. The main determinants that are the decrease in productivity of a nation's resources and increase of cost of production. A way this can happen is with oil prices. It is a factor of production, so when the price increases, it causes a shift, which then causes inflation. Now let's talk about the consequences of inflation and deflation.
Rising inflation affects many aspects of the economy. Some effects of rising inflation are falling real incomes, income redistribution, higher cost of borrowing, and risk of wage inflation. Falling real incomes means that there will be more wage cuts as a result of firms having to pay their workers more, and the firms will either lower their wages or let go of some of their workers, which will result in the fall of income. This then results in income redistribution because higher inflation rates have a regressive effect on low-income families. Costs of necessities increase rapidly, and due to that, more people will take loans. Therefore, the cost of borrowing increase because people want to be able to survive in a pricier marketplace. Therefore, they take a loan with higher interest rates. Lastly, the risk of wage inflation occurs when there is an increase in pay claims as people look to protect their real incomes. This leads to the rise in unit labor costs and lowers profits for businesses. Deflation in an economy is when the government lowers its investment spending and the value of the currency decreases. The causes of deflation are a decrease in aggregate demand and an increase in aggregate supply. Deflation is caused by the decrease in aggregate demand and increase in aggregate supply. The consequences include risk of bankruptcies and financial crises, uncertainty, large oligopolistic firms may fear price wars, and unemployment. Also, wages of workers do not ordinarily fall, meaning it is difficult for firms to lower the prices of their products, as this would cut their profits, especially since wages represent a large proportion of firms' cost of production. There are also large oligopolistic firms that may fear price wars, because if a firm lowers its prices, it will prevail only for a short period of time. Therefore, they would need to avoid lowering prices. There are also large oligopolistic firms that may fear price wars, because if a firm lowers its prices, it will prevail only for a short period of time. Therefore, they would need to avoid lowering prices. Bankruptcies and financial crises increase because deflation results in the increase in the real value of debt. If the economy is in a recession and the incomes are falling while real value of debt is increasing, this will occur.
So clearly there are some solid reasons for why governments want to try and manipulate the level of inflation, as by doing so they can actually alter unemployment levels. Governments have therefore devised a number of ways of dealing with different inflation levels, each method with its own pros and cons. And so, when demand pull inflation occurs, what typically happens is aggregate demand goes up. And as we can see through a monetarist graph, AD going up will actually raise price levels, but keep LRAS constant, so it's a negative. And therefore, governments will use contractionary fiscal and monetary policies. To be able to look at the pros and cons of these policies, just refer back to the notes we've taken so far. And then when cost push inflation occurs, what happens is short-run aggregate supply goes down. And referring to the same monetarist graph, that's actually a very negative occurrence. Governments want SRAS, or short-run aggregate supply, to go up, and so they will use inflationary fiscal and monetary policies to do so. And then to be able to evaluate the pros and cons of these policies, we ask that you return to your notes.